Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar and our WOW session for today. We are so excited. We have a great session planned for you. Before we get started, we have a couple of housekeeping items. I will introduce myself first because I always forget to do that. My name is Erin. I am one of the business managers here at AIM. I oversee our member and pre-hire services. So if you ever need any help, please let me know. I am here to assist. We are a webinar style format today, which means you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you. So how are you going to interact with us today? That is a great question. You are going to locate the chat at the bottom of your screen. If you do not readily see the chat function there, you should see a more icon with 3 dots in a circle. Click on that and you should see the chat function appear through that list. We will be interacting with you there. So if you have any questions, if you want to provide commentary to the discussion today, feedback, suggestions to any of the items that we're discussing today. Thank you, Angie. Good morning. So go ahead and chat those in. I will be monitoring that for today's presenter. And with that, we are going to be recording today's session, and we are going to present the slides to you and the recording after today, but I'll also put that into the chat, so I always know I get asked that question. And with that, I have a great presenter today joining me. Tanya Zion is a fellow business manager here at AIM, overseeing our engagement services. And I have the great joy of working with her consistently now for a couple of years. And she is going to talk to us today about our presentation. I think we do need to share your slide screen. I think it went away as we joined the conversation, so you may need to share your screen again.
All right, let's do that.
All right, and while you share your screen, I'm going to go ahead and chat with the peoples. And we're ready to go. Perfect.
All right, so can you see my screen?
Yep, we are good.
I love when that happens. Well, good morning. Good morning. We made it to Friday. I know for some of you, that means you have weathered some very cold temperatures. And I know that we've got people from all over the United States dialing in. So wherever you are, let me start with just the sincerest thank you for being here today. It means so much to us. I don't know if you produce content or events, but there's always this like moment of saying, are we speaking to things that people want to hear, right? Are we really meeting people where they are and solving a need? And so to see people join on the webinar, and especially when we see you interacting in the chat, I know that gives Erin and myself just an immense sense of satisfaction that maybe in a very small way, we are able to contribute and help you out in the work that you're doing. So thank you for being here. As Erin said, my name is Tanya Zion, and I am a business manager here at AIM. And really what that means is I am in charge of anything that sort of touches employee engagement. And I love that because that means I get to spend some hours of my day trying to stay current on trends and understanding that. I do that a couple of ways. One, I run our surveys here at AIM. So if you've ever conducted an employee survey, more than likely you've interacted with me. You've certainly interacted with Barb, who is our survey extraordinaire expert that we work with. And then I get the really kind of cool job of reading through that data and really getting to wear a curiosity hat and saying, why did the results come out this way? What's behind that? I have a little bit of an interesting background. For those of you that have been around, you know that about me. But for anybody that's new, I actually don't have a background in HR. My background started in sales. I threw in a legal degree in there. I have a yellow belt in Six Sigma. And really what this means is I've been doing consulting for as many years as my gray hair would indicate. And in that time that I've learned that no matter what situation we're in, I do think there are 3 critical factors that come together in any situation in business. And I like to think of that as like an isosceles, equilateral triangle. I'll get my right math term here. And I think of each of those legs as being people, process, and communication. And the best way I know how to really explain engagement is this way. When we've got strong process, when we have strong communication, and when we've really empowered our people and made right hires, and we have all of that going for us, then it's pretty equilateral, right? And nobody's getting stretched or thinned out. But we know business doesn't work that way. I don't know about you, but I bet there's new projects coming, processes we're having to add, we're recalibrating to a new strategic plan. And so there are often times in our environment where we have to shorten process because we don't have it. We're doing something new. And so if we don't immediately respond with more communication, the only way we can maintain that triangle shape is to stretch our people. And what I love about the engagement survey is I can see that in the data. And then I'm able to put a story to take back to your executive leadership team to explain, hey, some of the things that your people are saying, it's really not about pay and benefits. It's really not even about flexible work. It's about we have some frictions in the marketplace that are impeding my ability to do good work. So that's my philosophy. Get that out there front and center in case you don't agree with it. You can hop off. No, I'm kidding. Stick around. I promise we're going to have some good stuff. With this. And so we did put an agenda together today, and this is a little bit different. I know some of you actually spent some time with us earlier in the week. And here at AIM in the month of February in 2025, we have been all things engagement. And the reason we started off early in the year with this is we feel like it is so fundamental to so many other issues that you are working through that we want to bring it to the forefront of everyone's mind. If you are on this call and you do not run surveys, please get in touch with me after this, and I'll show you how we can help with that. It is an included benefit for our members, and then for a slight upgrade, we can actually get you some more detail as well. But I wanted to go kind of high level on engagement. And then every year, Erin calls me and she's like, have you seen the Gartner report? And I'm like, yeah, I took a look at it. And so we've done all kinds of fun things because Gartner really studies this. Obviously, they have more capacity than a lot of other organizations. And so they've got a lot of data that they compile every year as they look at engagement and what are the trends. And the reason we look at those trends is if we can stay in front of it, it's a really good thing. Now, I know a lot of you that are on this call right now are like, Tanya, I'd love to get ahead of anything. You haven't worked in HR. Do you know how many things I have on my plate that I never get to the bottom of my to-do list? And I get it. I really do. If you are somebody that is an HR department of one, there are going to be some things that you absolutely have to take care of. And even if you're an HR department of four, some of this might not be things that you can wholly control. But I firmly believe that HR is it is imperative that they have a seat at the executive leadership table. And so what I'm hoping we can do is in a very short amount of time, empower you with some information so the next time you're in those strategic conversations, we can start planting the seeds of things that may be to come. So that's really my goal today. And really, I look at everyone that's on this call, and that's a lot of investment we have in this hour. And so my goal for all of us is to walk away with an aha. And so if I can make an ask in this odd webinar environment where I can't see you, is if you have an aha moment, if you're like, wow, that's great, I can implement that, we throw it in the chat. That really helps us to understand if we're on the right track. And alternatively, if you're like, wow, I'm really struggling with an HR problem right now that I would just love somebody to like give me input, put that in the chat too. You will not believe how many absolutely brilliant people are sitting on the call, and they've probably dealt with that before. So go ahead and throw that in the chat. All right, Erin, did I set the stage? Are we ready to jump into our agenda? Okay, I love it. All right, so we're going to talk about why engagement is a key metric to monitor. And I know we don't always hear engagement. It's very, very rare, I think, for an executive to come and say, you know, unless you're used to tracking a net promoter score or something like that, engagement is sort of this elusive thing that I don't think people fully understand. And I know some people think engagement is how many people showed up for the pizza party, right? How many people are coming into the office on a hybrid schedule. And what the data tells us is those aren't really good metrics. So I'm going to show you some metrics that we can look at. And the reason engagement matters is because it is the root cause behind recruiting and retention. And I know those are challenges that you face every day. But I am of the mindset that if we fix engagement, recruitment gets easier and retention gets easier. And the reason is people actually love to come to work. They feel like they are part of something. It's a movement and momentum, and they want to bring their people who are smart and like-minded into and be a part of that. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about why engagement isn't one faceted. It falls into multiple different categories. And then we'll get into some of the trends that we're seeing. Now, Erin, I don't know if you remember, but last year we had pictures of hammocks under desks, right? We were right in the throes of return to office, and people actually were, I mean, it was like one of the top sellers on Amazon were these hammocks you can install under the desk. I will say our trends maybe are not as fun this year. It's a little bit different in what we were able to pull out. And then finally, as always, we're hoping that you leave with some actionable things that you can do and take back. So my goal is not only to have that aha, but be able to have something that you feel so compelled, it gets a coveted spot on your calendar. And the reason I say that is I sit on a lot of webinars, I take notes and I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea. And I don't know about you, but that notebook gets filed away on my shelf somewhere. So the metric that I have started to measure is if I attend something like this, was there change that came as a result? So that's going to be my goal. At the end, I'm going to follow up and see if anybody actually put a task on their calendar or something to do as a result of the information that we covered. All right, I love it. There's emojis in here and all kinds of stuff happening in the chat. And yes, Ginger, shout out to HR offices as one. You guys are just incredible, incredible people carrying a lot of things. All right, so engagement. It's not a buzzword. And I think you hear so many people that jump into the conversation and they have, the pizza party is the example for me. Now, I know I went to Gartner and did all sort of like this academic research on Psychology Today and preparing. Erin took a much, much smarter approach. Erin, do you want to tell me how you prepared and did your research?
I went to TikTok and social media.
I think that's very, very smart because you got all of that information just boiled down into easy bites that were kind of entertaining to watch. But what was interesting is through my heavy duty research, we actually saw a lot of the same trends. So some things that I'm seeing in the academic research, you were actually seeing, and you can even search employee engagement on TikTok, right? That's a buzzword out there.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. You can search any buzzword on any of the platforms. Actually, I searched actual full-on sentences and it came up with what I wanted.
So we know people are talking about it. And so here's my ask for those of you that are very social media savvy. If you have somebody that you love to follow on social media that talks about all things engagement and employees in the workplace, stick it in the chat because I'm always trying. There's the British guy that reads emails that come in about people and their bad work situation. And then it's Lauren that plays all the different characters. And she has a not so nice word on her coffee cup, but toodaloo. So those are some that I know that I follow. So if there's anybody you think about, put that in the chat for us too. So the thing we want to know about engagement and why we even start to look at this is what we know from the data, and this is backed by science, is that if we can measure engagement among employees, it has direct connection to ROI. So engaged employees are more productive, they're innovative, they're connected to their work, and they lead in performance and they stick around. And so when we think about from an HR perspective, we're looking at headcount, we're looking at openings, we're looking at all of those sorts of things. And then, later in the year, we're pushing for performance reviews. And engagement kind of sits in the middle because when we focus on the things that truly drive engagement, some of the other problems that we're having or the challenges that we're having just get easier because we've tackled the root cause. Oh, I love it. There's some great things that are coming through in the chat. So everybody grab those. And what I think is interesting about what's coming through is a lot of those are from the employee perspective sometime. And I think it's important to follow a couple accounts like that because you start to hear what employees are hearing, right? I was sharing with Erin that my kids came in last night and they're like, Mom, haven't you heard about working your wage? And I was like, you're 18. How do you even know that? Right? Because I had, a later night last night. And so, but that's the programming that they're getting. That's like the normalcy that they're being spoken to. And so then we have an opportunity to go, well, that sounds great in theory, but I also like to buy groceries. So here's where we are, kids. So that's what it is. But really, we monitor engagement. And as we understand that, and the better we can understand it from the organization's perspective and then also the employee's perspective, then what we're able to see is we're able to hone in. And I call an engagement survey kind of like a heat map. We actually color code the results. And so when we look at those areas that are in yellow, orange, or red, that is just sort of a heat map of, wow, I really need to get curious about what's happening in this department or with this more tenured group of employees or this location. And once we have that heat map, then we as leaders can start to ask really good questions to be able to monitor engagement and see what's happening. And so one of the things we do in our survey is we don't look at this one faceted, right? We aren't just a pay and compensation survey. And I'm speaking about AIMS, but I have also worked with Gallup survey. I think you can get really good. I know a lot of you out there do best places to work. And so no matter what survey that you are doing, I also love Brene Brown and Simon Sinek and John Maxwell. Saw those come up in the chat. No matter what you're looking at in your survey, the important thing is that you're surveying. But as you're starting to evaluate surveys, and I know I talk a lot of you that your HRIS maybe provides this, and you'll reach out to us to say, can you give us some questions? Here's my caution against doing an internal survey. One, it's not indexed. And so part of the reason the questions matter in what we are surveying. And so we actually have a PhD that not only wrote our survey, but then indexes it every year to make sure it truly is a predictor of engagement. And the reason I caution you a little bit about doing your own internal survey, I think it's great for pulse surveys if you're really wanting to understand one particular piece. But the question I would ask is, does your survey cover these three areas? And that really is that emotional engagement, right? How are they feeling? How do they feel about the work they do, their colleagues, and the organization as a whole? And then that cognitive engagement, right? Do I feel challenged? Do I feel like I like the work that I'm doing? And then finally is behavioral. Now, some of this comes out in different metrics. Do they show up? Do they show up on time? Are projects delivered on time? But so if you're doing a full engagement survey, I do think it's challenging to try to write that yourself because it is nuanced. And that is one of the things I like about the survey that we utilize is it's 62 questions, which people are like, whoa, that's a lot of questions. It takes about 15 minutes to complete and it hits on all of these areas. So just to recap, surveying is great. And another question that people ask, they're always like, well, how often should we survey? And my response to that is you survey as fast as you can change. There is a leading trend that it's like, oh, we need to be doing pulse surveys every quarter. And I think that's great if you have a leadership team that is responding to that feedback and actually affecting change. But so often when I work with organizations, they just really can't move that fast. And so my recommendation is run the survey, determine what you're going to change out of it, and then be able to demonstrate that change, communicate often about it, and then survey again. So that was a little aside, Erin, on that. So coming back to engagement and really what we're measuring, we've been studying this for a long time. So organizational psychology popped up around like the 1950s, 1960s. And that's when we started developing theories like working styles, DISC, which evolved into DISC and some of those other things. And along that time, we started to say, you know, as we get into more and more complex work, and as we move from being independent business owners, like the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, literally, right? We started to come through this industrial revolution where we were bringing in people to do tasks. And that out of that, then we started to do more complex intellectual work. And so we had to have a way that we could measure that. And so that's when this science started to come up. And so when we look at the Herzberg, he's somebody who studied engagement quite a lot. And he said, you know, there are going to be things that bring employees in, and that's just satisfaction. And if we don't get these six things right, employees aren't going to be satisfied. But there's more to the story in this. And so when AIM talks about things like, have you done a compensation study, right? OSHA, like all of your OSHA, is it up to date? What does your safety look like? No, even just things like, is it pleasant to go to your break room, right? I don't know how many people that are like, our big break room always kind of smells funky. You know, that impacts the way that people feel satisfied in their workplace. Do I have to sit in traffic or is it easy to get to my workplace? And I'm going to add this in the modern era. Do I have to go into work, right? Is that a demand every single day? That starts to play in this satisfier. And then, you know, we all want to know that we have continuity and job security and that we like the way the industry is going. And so those are things that are satisfiers. That's not the same as engagement. That's kind of the base layer that we need to get to. And then the motivators are really where we can start to drive and measure engagement. And so those are things like, do I feel like I have a purpose? Do I like the work that I do? Do I have leaders that I believe in that I think are taking us the right direction? Some of those emotional things. Do I like my friends and colleagues? Is my work challenging? We talk a lot about company values, right? And so the idea of respect and fairness comes into play. And if we're not living into those, then that's going to impact our engagement. And then, am I appreciated for the work that I do? And do I have enough autonomy that I can feel like the work is my own? Or do I have somebody that micromanages me? And then communication. We always hear about that. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all these, but I really wanted to set this stage that hopefully you'll see even the trends that we're going to be talking about relate right back to these aspects of engagement. And so I felt like it was really important to share all of this. And by the way, when you do a survey with us, I talk to your executive leadership team about some of these things too, and the importance of it, and that these items absolutely cannot live in HR, right? These are not HR tasks that we do as an organization. They spread across the entire organization, and that's why employee engagement, HR may own it, but everyone else has to execute against it. And then I always like this slide because, sometimes I know you go in and you're like, hey, we would have spent just a couple $1,000s to run a survey. And everybody's like, no, that's too much money. And there really is an ROI to doing this. If you can measure engagement, and oftentimes the recommendations I'm making after surveys cost nothing, right? It's putting together a communication email. It is literally writing thank you notes, right? Very inexpensive options, but those things move the needle in terms of productivity, profitability, and people don't leave as much. So there really is a realized benefit. Oh, Erin, anything I've missed in this or anything you want to circle back on or any questions we're seeing in the chat? Have I
No,
lost everyone?
no questions so far. I think you're fully engaged your audience. I think.
All right, well, just give me a moment in the chat. Let me know if you're still there or if you have any questions about this top level information. And what I'm going to move into is just this normative data, because the really interesting thing happened. So right around 2020, and we all know what's happening during that time. For the first time since we started measuring engagement, we actually saw engagement slipping and we haven't recovered. And so I wanted to just visit the normative data. I love it. I love it when the chat blows up. I wanted to really visit the normative data. And so you can see my very simple coloring here, right? Green, yellow, orange. Green is 65% and above in terms of a positive rating. Yellow is kind of in that cautionary. And then when we get into the orange, that's an immediate action item. So this is kind of how our survey is set up. And this is normative data. So the nice thing is we're always indexing it back to the normative data. And you can see on the whole, we're not doing great, right? Most of the greens previously were really pushing into at least 82, 83% positive. And when we had especially employee recognition and development, and communication did not rank that low historically. And so when I'm running surveys, that's one thing that we always want to say is, we got to look at the company score, but we also have to look at these averages. And so I'm here to say, if you are struggling with employee development and recognition, if you are struggling with communication, you are not alone. And the other interesting fact is, look at this other little one that is down here in the bottom, senior leadership effectiveness. I am working with a lot of organizations that are really struggling in this area. And I think I understand why is that we've had a lot of change at the top over the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of transition, right? If you think about the Great Resignation, they didn't just resign and go nowhere, they went to other organizations. And it was disruptive. And because we were in this time of not only a distributed workforce where maybe we weren't coming into the office, but we also kind of had our heads down and we're just focused on our work. And what I'm seeing in organizations is senior leadership teams didn't take the time to learn how they work together. And they didn't make that investment of getting to know each other. When I ask the question, do you have an executive team charter? The answer is not yes. And so what I'm seeing is this fractional divide that is happening in organizations where people are saying we don't work super great, like operational effectiveness. I feel like departments don't work well together. And so that's one thing that I would just encourage you. If you're feeling this and you're like, I don't know what like, I don't know what's broken, but something's not working here. I get on a call all the time and I get that. We just know we need help, but we don't know what we need help in. More than likely, if that's what you're feeling, there's probably some work we can do with your senior leadership team on how they interact and work together. And then we couple that with communication and what are those standard communication cascades that you have. But it's really hard to go to your executive leadership team and go, I think you guys need help, right? That's a hard conversation to have. So what I love about the survey is we run a survey and then the data is going to help us to explain that. And we certainly don't come from a blame or anything like that. We just meet everyone where they are. We get really curious and say, why would the employee's perception be that way? Is there work that we can do? And then we apply a framework that we know works to increase that. And we know this works. All right, so I want to kind of talk about something. If you've been in these, you know that there is this problem coming, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. If you want more information, we actually have a recorded webinar that we can send you. But I am coining this, we'll see if the name catches on, that we are entering into the great employee supply chain problem. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. So there's a question that came up, and I just wanted, before we get away from it, it says, you mentioned surveys, survey as often as you can process change. But my question is, when there's 50 plus question, how do you prioritize where to begin and process the change? That's a great question. Let me go back just really quick because other people have this question. So when you get your survey data back, we're going to stack rank your scores on this, and we're going to be able to see, hey, where are those problem areas? And then we're going to ask questions and get really curious about, well, what do we think is causing this? Do different groups of employee rank this different? You cannot boil the ocean. And so we're not going to solve everything after a survey. But what we're going to do is we're going to work with the leadership team to get exceedingly clear about what we are going to work on. And then we're going to communicate that to the employees. Thank you for participating in the survey. We value your opinion. I want you to know our entire leadership just spent an hour and a half with an outside consultant. We really want to solve this. We can't solve everything, but based on your feedback, here are the 3 areas that we feel like we can offer some immediate relief, and we're able to follow through on it in this time frame. And we publish that. And then what we do is we give them updates every month, every 6 weeks. But we come back and say, we promised you that we were going to give you updates on these 3 things, 4 things, and this is where we are. If you do that and you make those changes, employees will give you grace. They understand you can't fix everything all at once and that you're doing it in data backed because you've shared that data with them. Then you survey again and we see if those numbers moved, right? And more often than not, if you follow this approach, those numbers move, and then we resurvey and we repeat the whole process. What are the 3 things we're going to focus on? And so that's the thing that I think you have to be really good about communicating and detailing. We can't do everything, but we're going to do something. And once you start to instill that trust, that is where you see real culture change. That is where you see real engagement change. So I know we took a little deviation, but I thought that was an important question. And so I saw that, Erin, and I thought I would just jump in.
Yep.
Okay. The great supply chain problem. When I think about supply chain, I worked in a lot of industries with engineers, right? And they're producing products. And one of the things that we were always concerned about was good quality inputs. Because if your inputs are broken, a couple things happen. One, you can't produce what you're trying to, or more often than not, you're producing inferior quality and then your people have to bring it up to standard. And so I think that when I think about people and what's coming, I think about it in terms of a supply chain, and hopefully people can resonate with this. One, there just isn't going to be as much raw material. And what I mean by that is we are not producing as many people into the workforce. So 2007 is going to, 2025 is going to be the highest year of college enrollment because 2007 was one of the highest birth rate years. I know that because I had a baby in that year who's applying for college. Next year, we're going to see that fall down, and it really is related to these population slides. So here we're looking at the United States. I put these up for Europe and also Eastern Asia. Our population is dwindling. So we have this really interesting situation where we're used to having plenty of people to go recruit from, plenty of people to do. And we're not talking about a small decline. We're talking about a sharp decline that is happening pretty much worldwide in terms of our people. This is what I was talking about, the decline in higher education. Why does this matter to you? Well, if you're an organization that hires 18-year-olds right out of high school, there's not going to be as many of them. And if you are somebody who requires college degrees for your positions, in about 4 years, 5 years, there's not going to be as many of them. And so if we think about our people as our input, our supply, not only are there not going to be as many of them, and forgive the crudeness of this analogy, they're not going to be as quality, right? Based on our current standards, because they just simply are not going to be skilled the way that we're used to being skilled. And if you're hiring Gen Zs, you're already telling me that they're not skilled in the way that you used to think that were skilled. So academically, they might be very smart, but in more of those socially and civility type areas, they're struggling a little bit in the workplace. And so when I think about it as a supply chain, this is the way I think about it, right? We're used to having lots and lots of people. They were all pretty similarly skilled. I think that when, the boomers and the Gen X and even the millennials came up, we were more unified, I think, as a society. And I don't mean that in a political realm or anything like that. I mean, like, we all watch TJIF shows, right? Like, we waited for a series to come out and everybody knew the episode. I'm going to date myself. When 90210 came out and Brendan, like, something major happened, you were going to high school the next day and talking about it, right? We had newspapers, right? Everybody in your neighborhood walked up to the same newspaper on the front stoop. We don't have a society like that anymore. And so our common shared experiences are very different. And so when we think about what we can expect from people, I think there's this real rational reason that that is not nearly as standardized as it used to be. So I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way, but I do a lot of work around generations in the workplace. And that's one of the things we explore in the workshop is just we're changing as people. And so when you have 20% of those people that have had not the same shared experiences that you have come into the workplace, it creates a little bit of challenges. And we're going to talk about that as being one of the trends is this idea of loneliness. So we'll definitely talk about that. Here's a takeaway, maybe something to go on your calendar. If you haven't done this, what does your workforce look like? So if you were to go into your HRIS system and you were to pull all your records, how does your workforce map? And I'm going to take a guess. It is heavily weighted over here on this side of the scale. And so we're also going to talk about the implications and the trends for that in just a minute. So when we think about all of this, our expertise gap is going to intensify. It's going to intensify because there is this silver tsunami that's coming. Isn't that a crazy word? Like, Erin, I read that word and I was cracking up. I was like, hey, I kind of relate to that, baby, you know?
No, I already have gray hairs. No. No.
Hey, I've just learned to embrace it. So this idea, right, from the previous slide, we have boomers that are retiring in the tens of thousands every single day. Or they're not, and they're hanging on past retirement age, which also creates its own interesting dynamic. But what we know is retirements are coming. And this is what I have been recommending for years is that you need to plot that graph for your organization. And if you are not an organization that is great at written SOPs, now is the time to act. Because every time one of those boomers in the boomer generation retires, you are losing corporate knowledge. And so one of the things that I'm recommending is once you and the employee have a plan for retirement, really looking at shifting their job duties to their successor. Strong succession plans are just, you have to have them in your organization. And then task that pairing of really writing solid SOPs. Because now you've started to capture that corporate knowledge that maybe that employee that's been doing the same job for 15, 20, 25 years is just an expert at. But outside of their role, we may not have captured the nuance of how they get their work done. So that's going to lead to lost productivity. Also, don't overlook the relationships they have. I met with a nonprofit, somebody in this exact situation, they were retiring. they knew everyone in town. They knew every food bank and who had money and who didn't. And they were able to connect people with resources in a unique way. And so that's one of the things that we were working on is how do we get that knowledge out into the organization? So that's one end of the expertise gap. And the other is technology is moving fast. Erin, I know that you enjoy your Chat GPT bot, correct?
Use it every day. Use it every day.
I have started using it, and what is really amazing to me is it also can like crunch numbers and do all every day I learn something else that it can do.
Mhm.
And so what we're seeing happening and what I hear a lot in the surveys is employees want more training and technology. I think we're going to see. My son just sent me something this morning about, I don't know if anybody's read this, but there's like this new atom that can self-repair and it's like quantum physics. I don't know. It went way over my head. I'm glad he's really smart. I'll have him explain it to it. But every day, my point is, we're hearing new technologies that are coming out. We're discovering new things. And I think this is going to weigh on organizations because we have to have a way of knowing which technologies to adopt and how to leverage that. And so, some skills that maybe we had in the past, like an editor or being able to crunch basic skill sets, we maybe don't need a human to do that. But what we need is we need that same human to know how to leverage technology to do that. And so if people aren't staying up and current and we're not training people, that is going to create a problem. And so I think being able to leverage collective intelligence tools, that is the buzzword in the academic research that I had. I had never described it that way, but I have said these things, right? Mentorship programs. Erin, talk about your pairing, your duo that you like learned about. I thought
Oh.
that was so interesting.
So when I was doing the research for today, I came across a TikTok that talked about the CEO at Airbnb who was hiring a creative director position and onboarded a set. They came as a set, and it was a creative writer and a creative marketer, imaging, whatever. And came as a set because they each had their own strengths, and their strengths equaled a unicorn. Not every one person can be a unicorn on their own. Sometimes you need that duo to create that unicorn individual, right? What he found is that that duo was so great, it worked so well that he went to other departments and implemented like duos within those departments and then translated that to new hires. And he said that it worked on giving them support, creating support for each other. It worked on giving a shared journey for the people, creating, just a connection within the organization, which also speaks to like the loneliness that we're going to touch on. So it worked really well within that organization. So it's like a different take on mentorship programs because it's creating those skills and kind of balancing the strengths and weaknesses.
Love it. I thought that was such a cool example. And I had a little bit different take. I see a certain amount of risk when you pair people, right? Just because that we may miss there. But this is something I really encourage my leadership teams down to like the director level is if we are not, and then even for your individual teams, are you doing personality testing, right? Are we acknowledging that we come from different generations and we're developing an understanding and an empathy for why we think about the world through slightly different lenses? And then if we know that, if we know our team, then what we're able to do is go, wow, we have a gap over here on this kind of skill set. So when we hire, perhaps it would make sense to bring somebody on the team that has these skill sets. Now, there was a raging debate on LinkedIn the other day about the use of assessments pre-hire. And so I know all of you, some of you might have strong feelings about this. I think the key to assessment as we're trying to do that is to make sure it's calibrated for what we're hiring for, and that we have clear understanding of why we want that skill set that we're bringing on. But so often, especially in mid-sized companies, I go work with their leadership teams and they're all the same personality and they can't figure out why they're not making forward momentum. And I'm like, well, all of you are very analytical and you were very detail oriented, but you need somebody to come in that's like that strategic visionary to help. And so we have conversations like that. All right, so knowledge management systems, I think you need to have someone in your organization probably in your IT department, that has the really fun job of staying on the cusp of what's coming technology. We cannot adapt everything. We absolutely can't. I used to implement Salesforce for people. It's not a great fit everywhere, but now a lot of organizations use it. It's very different than it was when it first came out. Emerging technology is that way. So how are you vetting technology and how are you prioritizing it? Because it is going to move faster. I think we're going to have technology that becomes obsolete very fast. And we can't ignore AI. And I think everybody always worries, right? Like, I mean, I guess it's true if we think about it. The PC did probably really dampen whiteout sales. Gonna say that probably happened, right? Not many people buy whiteout anymore, but the people didn't go away. If anything, it allowed us to bring more people in. And I think for the most part, it's going to be people still having to leverage that technology to be able to continue the work, at least for the foreseeable future. I know that, inputs matter. And so our smart people putting things into AI is what matters. All right, so that was the first trend. We're going to intensify the expertise gap. Here's some things that you can leverage, and here's the easy, no-cost solution. Look at your organization. Who has lots and lots of knowledge, who maybe needs some of that knowledge, but maybe they're better with technology. Pair them up, create mentorship programs, capture your operational data so that you don't lose that as people retire. Yeah, Erin.
Here's an easy tool to use just as you're capturing that HR operational data, those SOPs that your generational people are taking with them as they go out. Scribehow.com, easy to use tool, helps you create those SOPs quick and easy. And as you are training those younger people, the older individual can just capture it as they're training. So it just minimal cost, Scribehow. Love it.
Love it. Jenna agrees. She's like, it's awesome. So this is why I love this tools. And there are a lot. So that's like a lot of screen capture, and then it's able to see what you're doing and create like those SOPs. So I think it's great. All
Great.
right, the next one, I gotta admit, Erin, it's a little hard for me to talk about because it makes me sad. It does. So the next employment trend that we know you all are dealing with really centers around mental health. And so let me just say, there might be people on this call that feel this, and it absolutely resonates with you that you're feeling lonely. And I think especially in the HR space, it's so easy to feel this way, especially if we're a department of one. And so I really, really encourage you, stay plugged into AIM, find a small group in AIM that you can come together and talk about these things and not feel alone. And I just want to acknowledge mental health is something that we're all talking about, right? This concept of burnout, all of the generations are really experiencing this, but it's made its way up to being a trend and what is influencing employee engagement. And so I don't want to take this next bit lightly at all, but I do think it's important for us to talk about it. I think as you think about your benefits, this is a benefit we really need to be exploring. And I went to Gallup's, Forbes, some big companies that have done some pretty thorough research. I'm also including all these links so you can do your own reading after this when we send out the slide deck. But 1 in 5 employees report feeling lonely during their workday. Younger workers are particularly affected. 45% of employees aged 18 to 25 experience loneliness at work. And that's no surprise. If you do research on our teens, our high schoolers, they're feeling that way in high school too. We have shifted how we interact. And you've got digital natives that have always had a phone in their hand. And we are seeing the consequence of that play out in society. And interestingly, it affects both genders. So we've got both men and women with similar levels of loneliness, and about back to that 20% as we think about it. So imagine that you are in a return to work situation. You come back to work and everybody is on Zoom calls all day long. And so you're sitting in an office next to people, but you're still on Zoom. And you're like, well, that's it, Tanya. We just bring everybody back to the office and that solves it. And I know there are CEOs of major financial institutions that are saying that is what we're going to do, but let's do a little bit of research on this. So if we look at, is work from home the cause of this? And yes, there is a higher rate of loneliness among remote workers. Because they have reduced face-to-face interactions. And that Gallup report found that 25% of remote workers report feeling lonely. However, 16% of on-site workers also report this feeling of loneliness. It is very much amplified for the new workers because they're trying to figure out how they fit in. So, Erin, tell your story from TikTok, and then I'll come in with my mom advice of why I think this is.
So, well, I stumbled across several on this topic because this was a huge topic when I searched it. There's tons of social media created around this topic alone. Most of it is centered around the younger generation creating these topics. Now, I came across one that likened it to going to a party, where you're, going in, you're hanging out by the food table, going to the bathroom a lot because you don't know anyone and you showed up to the party alone. And she likened it because, it's right out of college in your first 2 years at a company, it's like going to a party alone. It's going to be awkward. You don't know anybody. And the same happens if you leave a job and you go to a new company. You're going into an established culture and an established team likely, and you don't have your where you fit in. And it's creating that loneliness, whether you're a remote person or in office. You could be surrounded by people and still be lonely in that environment. And so it's just creating that concept of lonely. So she likened it to a party, and I can relate because I'm an awkward person at any social event. So it was a very interesting take on it, and I was very related to it. So
Yeah, absolutely. Some of you have heard me tell this shoe story, and we don't have time for it today, but tune in to another talk and you'll hear my shoe story. But here's just a thought that I had. I remember as my kids came up being teenagers, right, where they had kind of autonomy, a weird thing happened when friends came over. I didn't see the friends. They snuck in through the garage, grabbed some ice cream out of the freezer, and then they were holed up somewhere in the house. Or like they didn't ring the doorbell. I mean, I remember that was like a rite of passage, right? When you had to like go to your friend's house and ring the doorbell. Hello, Mr. Smith. I'm here to see Jane, right? I don't know about you, but our kids just don't do that. They sit in the driveway and they text or they kind of avoid that adult interaction. And so we have a rule in our house that if you come to my house, I have to see you, right? Like there's a safety issue for me that we have to do this. And yes, everyone thinks that I am a very strict mom, and that's okay with me. And so what you do in your home is totally your choice in how you do it. But let's think about this. Let's try it on for a second. If I'm a new worker that's 19 or 20, and the way that I have always interacted with people older than me has been almost an avoidance, right? That is going to automatically create a certain amount of anxiety for me when I have to go and interact, right? We see this in the research, difficulty making eye contact, difficulty in reading social cues, some of those things. And I know you all are dealing with this in Gen Z. On top of not wanting to do the hard work and the dirty work in manufacturing, there's also this thing that I am seeing come out in surveys where the newest members we're bringing into the workforce never integrate, right? Maybe people on the shop floor have got running jokes, they're doing funny things, and they're not bringing up the younger workers and bringing them into that circle because it's not easy, right? And again, we're talking in generalities. Everybody's an individual. I want to put that disclaimer in. But I think we have to, right? We talked about a supply chain gap. And I think that part of the expertise gap, even that we just talked about, is those social skills. So, what sorts of bridges can we create in our organizations that almost help facilitate those conversations? We have a program that we've worked with manufacturers that we have built-in touch points that are literally like conversation starters for those first 90 days when we bring in somebody into a manufacturing facility so that we're helping supervisors engage in that conversation. And what we're doing is we're preparing the new employee with what's going to be asked so they don't have anxiety. They have time to rehearse that answer, to think about what they want to do. And we're seeing that be successful. But I think that we really have to think about how do we like bring them in and integrate them in a way that all of the onus isn't on them. And yes, I know for those of us that are in different generations, this feels like an odd concept. But if we don't have the raw material that we need, we have to, as organizations, develop and cultivate that so that we have that. All right. This is something that I am very passionate about because we need that next generation of workers to be successful in the workplace. And I don't know that we're currently entirely equipped of how to do that. So just again, the impact of loneliness, it's going to impair reasoning. You just feel sluggish. You don't feel like you fully engage. And what we know about some of the Gen Z workers is they're just quitting. They're not even giving the employer the opportunity to fix it because there isn't that foster of communication to provide feedback. And of course, that leads to higher absentee rates. You all know this. You're hiring for the same position 4 times in a calendar year, and it's frustrating. So maybe think about some of these root causes and do I have a friend at work, right? Going back to those Herzberg motivators, do I feel respected? Do I feel like I have somebody? Do I like my colleagues? All of that matters. It's all connected. Am I painting that picture, Erin? It's all intertwined and connected on this engagement. And we can see it's so much more than pizza parties. All right. Last year, we were talking about a return to office. We were talking about you have to be remote. If you're watching the headlines, everyone's still grappling with this. And I'm going to coin the word for 2025 is flexible work arrangements. So not even hybrid, not even work from home, but what employees are asking for is flexibility. And what they want is they want to be able to take care of the things they need to have work-life balance and not constantly be working off of a PTO. Now, let me say, I know some of you that are on here are manufacturing. There are certain jobs that we absolutely have to have people in. However, I will say that I've seen certain organizations come up with like 3 flex hours a week that they're even offering to manufacturing. A lot of companies, this was a topic last year, are still exploring that 4-day work week. So the company is open 5 days, but we're bringing in workers to really fulfill all those productivity levels. Here's some interesting data, and I don't know, Phil Brandt, if you're watching, Phil may have a different take on this in this week at work, but this is it's just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. So with engagement levels, hybrid workers actually exhibit the highest engagement rates at 35% when we were looking at this. And fully remote workers are just a 2% behind in terms of the amount of engagement they have. And on-site workers show the lowest engagement at 27%. So I think this is really interesting because I know in the TikTok world, we see this sometimes of people being like, I get caught at the water cooler, I get caught in the break room, and I can't get stuff done. I'm in a really interesting position because I think I have only had an office at one job in my entire career. So I've always been a work from home person and remote. And I always have this, I don't want anybody to ever question if I'm working, right? So I am head down all day long, try to be as available as I want, but I also can arrange my day. So I think it's really interesting. So another data source says that remote workers are found to be 35 to 40% more productive than their in-office workers. And hybrid workers actually have a 33% reduction in employee attrition. And that's from Bureau of Labor Statistics. So I think this is really interesting data, but here's the caveat. It doesn't always work. And here are the companies that fail with hybrid or remote working. They do not have clearly defined KPIs for each role. We know people come to work, but as the leadership level, we don't have our hands around what it is people are doing. And so we can't measure it. And the other thing where it fails is we don't have routine, constant communication, right? So if I'm in a hybrid environment, I need to be having a one-on-one probably weekly in some form with my manager. Maybe it's a quick 15-minute touch base and then an extended hour-long meeting twice or once a month. I need to be having team meetings. I need to be having project meetings. And those need to be happening in, whether I grew up in conference calls, right, where we were just listening to people. I think Zoom really is incredible. And if it's done well, you can look at us, we're interacting here, right? We're talking and we're doing all of that, but you've got to play to those fundamentals to be able to do that. And so, yes, I know we're going to continue to talk about work from home and all of that. And I know you guys are up against, you're going to get this data and you're maybe going to go back to some executive team that are like, nope, we're not doing it here. And so my advice to you is if you want to drive engagement in office, guess what? It's the same things we just talked about. Routine communication with your manager, routine communication with your teams, clarity on what we're doing here and what success looks like. And then we're celebrating that. And so being able to do that. If you can adopt flexible work models, can you flex 3 hours a week so that if you have a doctor's appointment, it doesn't ding PTO? What's available, right? And you'll have to answer that for your organization. But I also think enhancing remote work support isn't just about tools and technology. It's also training your people to know how to be able to do that and be able to do all of that. And you also have to lean into your core corporate value of trust and autonomy. You have to, right? It has to start from a place of, I know my people are working. I'm going to trust them to get things done versus spending a lot of time accounting for the work that they're doing. And there's a huge difference in the way we think about that. All right. So not all engagement's the same. It isn't a one size fit all concept, right? It spans lots of dimensions. I hope we're seeing that, right? We've talked about SOPs and we've talked about loneliness and we've talked about all kinds of things. Did you notice what we didn't talk about this year? That's pay, right? That's sort of kind of getting settled. And part of that is because it's one of those satisfiers, right? But the key thing that I hope everyone is taking away is that not one size fits all, and not every organization is going to be dealing with the exact same problem. Even if across the board communication scores rate low, your particular problem with communication is unique to the way you deliver information. And so I think measuring and being able to look at it from different demographic levels is really, really important. Data is what we need to do. And I think so often we overlook the data that we do have in HR, and it's really important to leverage all those tools that we have. All right, I'm going to put this in. We're not going to have time to go like line by line. There's a lot on here because I knew we'd be sharing the slides and I wanted you to have it all. But these are the minimum, right? If we go through these different dimensions of engagement, use this as a self-audit. Print this out, take a look at it, grade yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 and see where you are. And then when you think about your strategic initiatives for 2025, where can we lean in and help, right? Where do you need support? What can we do? But these are sort of those foundations if you want to start to move and move engagement forward. But again, I can't overemphasize this. It's not a one size fits all. That's why we have to do the research and have the data and really get into the nuance. We're in the business of people and people all have their own things that they come to the office with. So understanding that, we really need to understand that, analyze the insights and customize strategies, and understand that in an environment where we are going to have a people supply chain issue, meeting people where they are, showing them that we value their talent and their time and who they are as people is going to be the winning recipe for retaining people. And that is going to be the limited supply. And the companies that get that right are going to have a market advantage. I know I pushed us to 2 minutes to have questions. Erin, let's go.
All
What
right.
answer?
All right, we had a question come in through the Q&A. So how do you empower your leaders to action on their team survey results? Seems like some of them are more motivated than others and see it as another task from HR.
So we have to get buy-in, and that's what I love about AAIM survey is it doesn't just talk about HR policies. The other thing that we include on our survey readback, it's weird to say this, is me. So this same tone and tenor that I am putting here, I'm going to hold people's feet to the fire. Frank is one of the CEOs that we work with, and he pulled me aside in the hallway and he's like, Tanya, it's a love-hate relationship with you. We love that you come here because you make change, but man, do you ask tough questions. And so I think sometimes, I can get fired. If you don't bring me back, it's no big deal. I have a little bit more rope to say the things that need to be said. And so partner with an outside. I can say the exact same things that you've been saying, and for some reason it lands different. So I would really encourage that. Take some of this data back to them and be able to do that. I think we have time for a couple more.
I know that some people are chatting in with this answer, but I do want to kind of draw it to your attention because I think you have some insight in this. How do other companies leverage work from home for some, but warehouse workers cannot? How does a company juggle and balance that to make it fair? This has come up in some of the roundtables this week. So what's your take on that?
So I think, first of all, we have to get clear on how you contribute, right? We need to say to every employee, you're valuable, and we all could not be successful without the work that you're doing. And then I think that it isn't always going to be the same across the board, but what is fair in those employees' mind, right? If they wanted work from home, they wouldn't have a warehouse job, right? Like that's just logical. So what is it under that? What is behind that fairness that they feel like is the gap? Because it's really not about coming to work. Is it the autonomy they have? Is it the flexibility that some people get to take their kids to the doctor and I don't get to do that? What is it that is really that they're wanting? And then how can you be generous on those things? So I think have conversations, have some focus groups. Hey, you're always going to have to come in. That's the nature of the work. But we all benefit in these ways by being able to get talent in other ways and offer work from home. So I think we have to have just candid conversations and talk with people. And then where we can be generous, be very generous.
I'm going to squeeze in one more question. How can we encourage employees, specifically new hires, to participate in the surveys that we're doing?
Data, data, data. So one of the things we do on our complete survey is we add in a demographic that says what's your tenure at the organization. And then we provide that data back to employees. And if only 2% of your new hires completed it, we want to talk about that, right? We want to bring focus groups in and say, hey, like you didn't fill out the survey, help us to understand why. So that's on the back end. On the front end, though, what I say about our surveys, run your survey when you already have an all hands meeting. The survey becomes an agenda item. It's the last thing on your agenda. You get through all of your business. You've already blocked out the employee's time. Give them 15 extra minutes right there to take the survey. AIM makes that easy because it's mobile accessible. We can set QR codes up on the table and they can literally set from their seat time that has already been bought away from production and have them fill out that survey. So don't just send it to their inbox. Give them time, put it on their calendar to do it.
That is a great.
Oh, and I know everybody's gonna have to jump, but if you are putting anything on your calendar, put it in the chat box. What's your takeaway? We would love to know that. That's gonna help everyone. And we'll hold on for one more minute. And I know some people have to jump, but Erin, what's another question?
Yeah, no, we had another comment through the QA. So how do you incorporate how do you incorporate DEI within employee engagement survey and practices?
So I have been maybe one tick off of DEI through this whole thing. And my take on this is that we have to see people as individuals and here's why. My job is part of my identity. If I meet someone new and I'm having a conversation, within the first 15 minutes, somebody's going to ask me, what do you do? And my identity rests in that work. I am choosing to be part of this organization and to give my time and talents to be able to show up and really make it so the company prospers. And so DE&I in mind is how are we ensuring that we see people for who they are, we understand the value that they bring, and we're asking questions of, do you feel like your talents are put to use? Do people see you? Right? And if we're doing that right, then the next step that we need to look around is to say, does my current environment match my community environment? And if there's a gap there, then let's make sure we're going and finding talent in all of the sources that we have to find talent. And I think that onus is on us to be able to say, does my workplace community really reflect my broader community as a whole? And I think employers that get that right can stay out of the noise of DEI because you are fostering a sense of diversity. You are seeing people who are who they are, and you're creating bridges for inclusivity. And you're really looking at this from various aspects and going, okay, we may not be able to make everything the same, but how can we make it right in terms of offering support and training and all of that so everyone can show up in that. So that's my take on all of that. We do measure those things in the AIM survey and being able to do that.
That's awesome. Fantastic. And we have some responses. I know we're over time. Thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us today. Thank you everyone for joining us. I will be disseminating the chat along with all this other content. So you guys will also have all the great conversation that we were having in the chat today. And just join us next month. We'll have another great conversation going. And until then, have a great rest of your day.
All
Thank you,
right.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.